Thank you all for attending today's Foreign Policy Speakers Series. As you all probably know, the purpose of the college's Foreign Policy Speakers Series is pretty much to bring in professionals from the international affairs field to address our community and discuss with them through a joint questions and answers session. Well, today we welcome Dr. Peter Howard from the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs at the State Department and Ambassador His Excellency Hisham Naqib from Egyptian Consul General in San Francisco. Dr. Howard is a regional affairs analyst at the U.S. Department of State. His previous experiences include being a fellow at the American Association for the Advancement of Science and assistant professor and director of pre-college programs at American University, where he gained his PhD in international relations. Dr. Howard's current position focuses on analyzing and assessing Middle East regional security and political reform for the Office of Regional and Multilateral Affairs and making policy recommendations for the Assistant Secretary. His Excellency Naqib has received several posts at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Arab Republic of Egypt. He is currently the Consul General Ambassador of Egypt serving in San Francisco, California. Other posts included First Secretary of the Embassy of Egypt in Washington, D.C., and Director of the Cabinet of the First Under-Secretary of Foreign Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Dr. Naqib received doctoral accreditation from the Higher Council of Egyptian Universities and accomplished his master's studies in international relations at the International Institute of Public Administration in France. He is fluent in Arabic, French, and English, I believe. So with that brief introduction of both of our speakers today, we will begin with hearing from Dr. Howard.
Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here today to talk to you all the way from Washington. And to tell you a little bit about the State Department, what I do, and what we're doing about the dramatic changes that are taking place in the Middle East. And as you know, this has been quite a year for U.S. foreign policy and U.S. policy in the Middle East, and it's made for quite a lot of activity and excitement in our office. And so I want to share a little bit of that with you today and talk about what we're doing in response. So to begin, I serve in our Office of Regional and Multilateral Affairs, as you heard in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs. And the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs covers the region of the Middle East and North Africa, stretching from Morocco to Iran. So we have 18 countries that we're focused on, and we're one of the 6 regional bureaus in the State Department. The State Department is broken down into a number of different bureaus. 6 of us cover different regions of the world, and then the other bureaus cover specific functional and topical issues. As a regional bureau, our job is to make policy to the countries in our area, so the 18 countries, and we deal with the U.S. embassies in those countries, the ambassadors of those countries in Washington, and really manage the bilateral relationship and are concerned about regional issues. And my office, in particular, is concerned about the regional trends affecting the area. And this is a really important bureau for us, a very important set of relations for us, because of course the U.S. has had vital strategic interest in the Middle East for years, right? It is an area of tremendous import to us, and it's a place where we've been concerned for a long time. And in fact, as a little note we like to share, the longest treaty of friendship between the United States and another government is the over 200-year-old treaty of friendship between the United States and Morocco, one of the countries we cover. So the United States has been involved and interested and had very good relations with the Middle East for quite literally 2 centuries now. This year has been one of the most remarkable in certainly my memory and quite possibly my lifetime of U.S. relations in the Middle East. We've seen transformative changes. It has rewritten a lot of our policies and has rewritten the script for the region. And what's happened is we're now seeing the Arab Spring, right, the tremendous changes that are taking place, really offer the opportunity and the possibility of democratic transitions in the region. And it really has changed what we at the State Department are doing with U.S. foreign policy. This really is a moment of significant policy change. And so for those of you who study U.S. foreign policy and want to know when and how U.S. foreign policy changes, this is a case study that you can look at not just today, but people will be studying for years to come. And so what I'd like to do today with you is tell you a little bit about how we at the department have viewed the changes, what we've been paying attention to, and how our thinking has shifted. And then tell you a little bit about some of the concrete steps that we've been taking to address those, and I'll end with a few remarks about how you might get more involved in this yourselves. Because I know this is very exciting. You all want to come to Washington and dip your hands into international affairs, right? Yes. Of course. Otherwise, why would you be here, right? So, what I want to start out with is talking about our important national interest in the Middle East. This is an area of vital strategic concern for us, where I said we have long-standing interests. Because of our focus and our concern in the Middle East, because of our long-standing strategic interests, we had been concerned in recent years with some what we saw as concerning subsurface tensions that were developing. We were very concerned with the fact that there was a massive youth bulge in the region. When you look at the population, for those of you who've taken your human geography or your basic population classes, right, you study your population pyramids, and most countries should have an equally distributed population between young, middle-aged, elderly people, and roughly about the same. In most countries of the Middle East, this is radically skewed into a pyramid where you have most of the people, in fact, a majority of the people, under the age of 30, under the age of 25. So imagine where half the population of a country is your age and younger, right? This creates a very interesting dynamic, politically, economically, because most of the people are young and looking to join the workforce, looking to come into opportunities, and the minority of the population is old and the ones who have jobs and are in power. Right? It's a very different population perspective than what we see here. Most of these young people across the region did not have opportunity. Right? There were not jobs for them. There was not political opportunity for them to express themselves or be heard. On top of this, there were shortages of water, there was resource depletion, and there's a widespread lack of political opportunity. As a result of all of this, we saw frustration, right, being expressed by a lot of the young people in the region, frustration that governments were not meeting the legitimate needs of the people of the region. So back in early January, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton gave a very important speech in Doha, Qatar, at an event called the Forum for the Future, addressing leaders of the Middle East. And she said to them, there is a big concern in your countries. We're concerned about your countries, and we want you to change to meet this concern. She said that it was necessary for countries to change lest the sand shift beneath their feet, and she noted that those who cling to the status quo may be able to hold back the impact of their country's problems for a little while, but not forever. Specifically focusing on the need for change. Her words were incredibly prescient because little did she know that less than a week after she spoke, the revolution in Tunisia would occur and President Ben Ali of Tunisia would flee from power. Now, Tunisia was perhaps for us an unlikely place to expect a revolution. And I will admit, it really did catch most of us by surprise. This was not what we were expecting, nor were we expecting it to happen as fast as it did. We looked at Tunisia and saw a relatively stable country, a growing middle class, a relatively open economy, and of course an oppressive autocratic dictator who had held power for 20 years and stifled nearly all political dissent. The fragile facade of stability, however, was broken by a 26-year-old fruit vendor, Mohamed Bouazizi, who set himself on fire when he was unable to sell his fruit. His actions resonated not just in Tunisia but across the world, with people who were similarly frustrated and similarly saw no other recourse. And within a matter of weeks, there was widespread revolution throughout Tunisia. The president fled from power, and all of this peaceful transition occurred much more rapidly than anybody took place, and inspired not just the Tunisians, but regional waves. And this culminated this past weekend when there were elections in Tunisia, and you had turnout of 90% in the first post-transition elections across the region. Now, this spirit of change quickly spread across the region. You have satellite television like Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya. You have Facebook, Twitter, and other social media devices, right? The iPhone, the BlackBerry, or your Android of choice, whatever sort of way you go on that, right? Has really become the tool of revolution where people could spread images and ideas and really generate a spirit across the region in ways that they hadn't been able to in the past. In Egypt, tens of thousands of people marched in Tahrir Square demanding dignity, and ultimately President Mubarak of Egypt was forced from office. In Libya, people defied Muammar Gaddafi's longtime oppression and rose up against his rule. In Yemen, Bahrain, and Syria, people took to the streets. All across the region, they peacefully demanded change in protests. Now, it's important to notice that these protests are not about us. the United States and our policies. When we look at these protests, we look at these changes, what we see are fundamental conversations happening between people and their government about the relationship that they've developed in their own countries, about the opportunities that government is providing for its people. What we see in these movements are multi-generational, multi-sectarian, right, multi-religious, multi-ethnic movements asking for more opportunity, asking for dignity and basic human values that we all share and that they should expect rightfully from their governments. Now, as a result of this, we think the region has changed. There's been a fundamental change in the region, and we now are approaching it differently. One of the most important changes that we have made is that we now see political reform as a necessary and crucial component to regional stability. Right? This is different than how we viewed things before. In the past, regional stability in and of itself was a very important goal for us due to protect our strategic interest there. But we now see that political reform is a necessary component of that. You're not going to get the stability we need without fundamental political reform. There's a new generation of leadership emerging across the country, the young people in Tunisia, Egypt, and elsewhere who have been at the forefront of these revolutions. But also others are losing influence. Iran, where we have an important national interest in protecting against their growing influence in the region and preventing them from acquiring nuclear weapons, right? There, we're seeing that they're losing influence in the region as a result of this. The pace of change is really passing them by. Iran has sought to exploit the uprisings of the region by saying, hey, we're with the protesters, perhaps against governments they didn't like. But in fact, what we're seeing is that the opening of media, the open of discussion, right, is laying bare the hypocrisy of Iran, which represses its own internal dissent movement and has repressed demonstrators inside Iran. And greater openness across the region shines a bright light on Iran and the other dictatorships that continue to hang on and show that they're on the wrong side of history. Even violent extremist organizations like Al-Qaeda are losing out. Al-Qaeda, which has very active chapters in the Arabian Peninsula, in Yemen, in the Maghreb, North Africa. These groups have preached violent change and have been very interested in changing and overthrowing governments of the region. And for over a decade have preached violence as the way to achieve that. Here you have active young people armed with no more than their cell phone, people much like yourselves, bringing about more change with peaceful, nonviolent movements than these extremist groups have been able to do in over a decade. It really does delegitimize their narrative, delegitimize their appeal, and shows that they too are on the wrong side of things. Because ultimately, we think that legitimate governments are best able to provide for their citizens, are best able to give the citizens the dignity that they are looking for, and provide the stability domestically and then regionally that we see as so important. So what I want to do briefly is tell you about a few of the things that we're doing in response to the changes in the region and some of the specific policy steps that we're taking. Now, our initial move when we first saw the changes, the uprisings in the region of Tunisia and Egypt, was to say, look, our response is going to be guided by 4 fundamental principles. And these are basic principles of U.S. foreign policy that we apply not just to the Middle East, right, but globally. But it was very important for us to emphasize these principles because they are so important. And these are anchored in, right, our universal values, or values that we see as universal. First, we opposed the use of violence against peaceful protesters, and we supported the universal right of free expression, assembly, and association. Okay? Governments should not oppress those who are demonstrating. They should not do this violently. We support, right, the right for people to participate in the affairs of state. We condemned killing, torture, and abuse of peaceful protesters. And of course, we called on all governments to respond to the legitimate demands and aspirations of their people. Right? We apply this message universally, not just in the Middle East, but worldwide. But in particular, then, we had several significant policy shifts that we took as we saw these demonstrations progressing. Most important was the May 19th speech by President Obama. And I would commend this speech to you. Yesterday in our conference, all of us who were on the podium mentioned President Obama's speech at one point or another, because it is such a significant speech. And it really did set the tone for our policy. I like to remark that, you know, President Obama was up there speaking for only a matter of minutes, maybe 20 or 30 minutes, maybe 40 minutes. But what he said has given us in the State Department at least a year, if not 2 years worth of work, right, to implement his goals and his vision as articulated in that speech. In that speech, he said that supporting the changes in the Middle East, supporting political reform and democratic transitions will be a top U.S. foreign policy priority. And we then have had to reformulate our approach to the region to enact the president's message. But, as Secretary Clinton has noted many times, our response to the countries has been different. Each country is unique, and we do not have a one-size-fits-all policy. We must note the significant differences of each situation and tailor our response in response to that. Because not only is each country's situation different, but the people of each country are asking for different things. And we must respect their demands. Because ultimately, the movements and the transitions are not owned by us, right? They're owned by the brave people who are standing up to governments, right? Who are standing up to governments that would repress them and asking for a better life. So we must listen to them and we must act accordingly. We have determined that securing a successful transition for democracy in both Tunisia and Egypt is a core priority that really cannot be overstated. Tunisia has become a powerful symbol for the region. Its elections this past weekend, 90% turnout. It's amazing, right? It's a beacon of hope. It's the beacon of what's possible for the region. It shows real promise. We're also very supportive of Egypt, and you'll hear in a minute a lot about what's happening in Egypt. And we're very much committed to offering our support to Egypt as they move towards carrying out free and fair and credible elections later this month. Right? Egypt now faces the challenge of forming a new parliament as it prepares for elections. And we think it's taken a lot of steps in the right directions, and we're supportive of that. And we will look forward to working with the Egyptian government as we look to witness these elections at the end of the month. We worked with the Transitional National Council. That was the group of opposition that came up in Libya, right? The unifying umbrella group of the opposition in Libya opposed to Gaddafi's rule. We worked with them as they moved to overthrow Gaddafi's brutal dictatorship. But it's important to note that in Libya, we were working not just with the Transitional National Council, but also with partners in the region, the Arab League, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is the group of countries right around the Persian Gulf, in addition to regional partners and NATO and the UN, all of whom, in support of a UN Security Council resolution, were protecting civilians in Libya and trying to help the TNC. Okay. They brought about an end to a 42-year-old brutal dictatorship. Now the TNC has declared liberation. They're focused on moving towards an electoral process and setting up an interim government, and they too will begin their steps on this democratic transition. And we expect this to take a little time, but we're looking forward to working with them on that. In Syria, we look at the current uprising there, and we see that Bashar al-Assad's government has actually become a source of instability for the region. And the president has already called for him to step aside. And that shows why we see political reform moving forward as so important to regional stability. Assad's repression of his own people creates instability. Moving forward with reform there will help stabilize not just that strategic country, but the entire region as a result. And we're also concerned about Yemen, and we've called on President Saleh there to begin a transition process and follow the Gulf Cooperation Council's plan for transition there. We're supportive of countries like Jordan and Morocco that have taken preemptive steps to address many of their citizens' demands, and we're trying to encourage them to make good on those commitments. And we're continuing our long-standing efforts to support civil society across the region. We've also allocated resources to support this. We've allocated this past year $135 million of foreign assistance to respond to emerging needs. And this is important because in the U.S. foreign assistance budget, I'll just say one thing about this, and we could talk about this at greater length if you have questions about it. The way U.S. foreign assistance is set up is in bilateral accounts that are established on an annual basis, and then we determine what we're going to fund and who we're going to give that money to. It's not very flexible. So when things change, when governments change and new priorities emerge, it's hard for us to respond. So we've tried to create a new fund that allows us to respond and be flexible and address needs as they come up. And while this may sound like a lot of money, in the grand scheme of things, it's a very small part of our foreign assistance budget, and more importantly, it is a strategic, long-term investment in our future to protect our national interests. We see the success of these transitions as important, and by putting a little bit of money down to help them, we think that we can reap long-term benefits. As we witness this transition, we want to remember that we're only at the beginning. We've seen the first act. There's a lot yet to come. And this is something we're going to be following for the coming year, and the coming 2 or 3 years. And we're going to be watching and helping and working with our partners as consolidating these transitions over time, because this takes time. And as I end, I want to just make one plug to say that although this is something that I'm doing with my colleagues in our office back in DC at the State Department and working with my colleagues around the world in US embassies across the world, across the region in these countries and capitals, this is not something that should be far removed from you. This is something that you have the opportunity to get involved with as well. You know, we at the State Department are always looking for the next crop of talented young people, some of whom may be you. And we're encouraging you to do what you can to get involved. And you're already doing a great start by coming to a discussion such as this, by being interested in international affairs, by paying attention to what's going on in the world. And if you're interested in this type of career, I would encourage you to do a couple things. Learn a foreign language, study abroad, get real experience dealing with other cultures, other countries, other people. It's vital experience. Learn about the relationship between politics and economics. Right? We heard that you guys have a unified IPE program. That's fantastic, because one of the things that we've learned is that economics are an integral part of this political change. You can't really separate the two and expect one to work without the other to work. Take advantage of internships. We at the State Department have an internship program you can apply to. I think the applications are probably due in the end of November for the following summer, but you can actually intern year-round. Intern not just at the State Department, but there's a whole host of organizations in Washington that would love to have you come spend a semester as an intern, right? Get this experience as much as you can, learn languages, and then use this to take advantage of many of the programs we have. Through internships, we have student programs where you can stay on and transition to a full-time worker. We have fellowships for people to study abroad, board fellowships, critical language fellowships, and we have other ways to get people out of school, career entry programs, presidential management fellowship programs, Pickering and Wrangle scholarship programs, all of which are there to open up opportunities to people like you who are talented, interested in the world, and want to come participate in that. And you don't have to go to the State Department. I work every day with colleagues around the government in the places you would think, like the Defense Department and the intelligence community, but also with people in the Commerce Department, in the Treasury Department, in the Agriculture Department, right? All of the government has some sort of international component, and we also work with NGOs, with think tanks, and with other institutes around DC. So there are many opportunities for you to get involved in this, and I would encourage you, if this is something you're interested in, look for these things, take advantage. You can start here with what you're taking. There's a lot of ways to do this, and I would encourage you to think about this as something, because it's been an exciting year for me at the State Department, and it's something you might also enjoy as well. So I will stop there, and thanks to my ubiquitous tool, I know that I've been relatively in time.
Very much. I'm so happy being here, seeing all those young faces, and I know very well that you're here, as my dear friend Peter Howard said, because you're interested in international relations, or otherwise you wouldn't be here. And I know that each one of you has a feeling and the desire to change, and change is the key word. And I would like to start with the word change, because I want to engage with you in a conversation from the heart to heart. You see that I'm not armed with any papers, because I don't want to put my thoughts into a parameter. I know that this is a recorded session. I'll try, as usual, to behave, but still, if I go right and left, please don't take it against me. It is just a heart-to-heart conversation. I come from the region that attracted the international community's attention. I'm very proud of being an Egyptian before being an ambassador. I come from a country of the oldest civilization on earth. We're pharaohs. We're pharaohs among many other things. We're pharaohs, we're we're Arabs, we're Christians, we're Jews, and we're believers in everything in the world. I mean, we're at a crossroads from the east to west. Egypt had hosted not only its civilization, but multi-diversified civilizations. We're a prosperous country. We've been occupied by almost every nation. We fought almost every nation. So you could see that this country, which is the heart of the Middle East, is a country of a great experience and great people. That's why I say I'm proud of being Egyptian. We have gone through many revolutions in Egypt. We have gone through tumultuous time. The beginning of, I don't want to take you so much back into our history. Our history is so full of interesting stuff. Probably one of the most important things that I would like to mention is, and I don't know if my friend Dr. Howard knows that or not, the Egyptian-American relations started even before the Civil War. I mean, yeah, we had the first American battalion defending Egypt in the late 18th century. And as a matter of fact, most of this battalion is honorably buried in Egypt. And many of our American dignified visitors would come and pay homage to them. It shows you that we go a long way back, I mean, with this great country. That's why when I say that we're partners, it's not just a matter of the century or even the last century, it's a matter of 2 centuries. So you could see that this relation is instilled in our history. We do not forget that those brave battalions that came defending Egypt trained also the Egyptian army, modernized the Egyptian army, and we still remember them. Having said that, I want to also mention I wouldn't say a new element in my conversation, but I would say an important factor that we all have to bear in mind. Egypt is not novice when it comes to democracy. We have had a long experience of democracy in the years 1920 to 1952. And probably we were under the British occupation at that time, but our democracy was an indigenous democracy. We had an extremely rich political parties, basically a left and the new left, the Saudis, which is again, left parties and right parties. We would have governments that would resign against allegations of corruption. We had free press. We had the king of Egypt thrones being shaken many times by free press. We had an extremely vibrant political life in Egypt during those years. And then comes the revolution of 1952, that again was a revolution that was being brought by the army and by the young Egyptian population who thought that the king was a corrupt king and that they wanted to get rid of him, they wanted to take their destiny in their hands. And then here comes Nasser in 1952 with all the different political landscape at that time. And it's strange, history repeats itself. Again, mostly are Islamic parties, some were left parties, few of them were in the middle ground. But unfortunately, because again, the international political environment was not very much ready for that experience, Nasser had to take things into his own hands because, quote unquote, he was defending Egypt against a new invasion that Eisenhower had stopped. Again, a new angle that probably you were not aware of, that we studied in our history books, that Eisenhower intervened to prevent a new invasion of Egypt in 1956 during the Suez Canal crisis. And he stopped the British and the French from literally occupying Cairo. They were about 60 miles away from Cairo. But what I'm driving at is that our political experience at that point stopped, froze, the army took over, and from 1952 till 1970, Nasser took power. our political life came to a standstill. We got into a war with Israel, where we lost. Nasser passed away in 1970. Here comes Sadat. Sadat came with a vision during that time of trying to build on what Nasser had wanted 20-something years ago, 1952. So he had started establishing what he called at that time manabir, which means small parties, gave the press a little bit of freedom. But again, unfortunately, it came to a standstill because of 1973 war. The Egyptian army did well. We crossed the Suez Canal, and then Sadat engaged into lengthy negotiations with the Israelis, of course, through the mentorship of the United States. We had what we call the first withdrawal, second withdrawal, third withdrawal, and then Suez Canal was reopened, and then he engaged into a lengthy peace negotiations with Israel, again with the mentorship of the United States. During that time, Sadat tried to open the Egyptian economy. It was enclosed for such a long time. Nasser was within the Soviet bloc. Sadat, for one reason or another, moved us to the Western bloc. He believed it's in the best interest of Egypt to open its economy, to open its political life. Probably he moved so fast. Again, the political forces of Egypt jumped in at his opportunity of opening of the open political system. They wanted to accomplish everything in a very fast pace. The young Egyptian population took down the streets in 1977, and Sadat was concerned. It was during the peace negotiations. He didn't want anything to shake the domestic life, he didn't want the domestic life of Egypt to shake our international endeavor. For him, that was a priority to establish peace. He took things into an iron fist. He threw people in prison, Islamists, leftists, press people, and he paid his life as a price for that in 1981 when he was assassinated. And then comes Mubarak. Mubarak comes in 1981 with the reconciliation, of course, with all the different political forces that were imprisoned by Sadat. He set them free. He tried to reinstate Egypt within the Arab world because we were alienated from the Arab world as a result of Camp David. We were punished. And so he tried to reinstate Egypt. He opened the economy on slow pace, probably slowly but faster than whatever he accomplished on the political scene, because he still was adamant on moving the political freedom of Egypt in a very slow pace. Probably some of our analysts would say because he was so much concerned that he would meet the same fate as Sadat. So he was a bit cautious on the political side, but on the economic side, I think in the first 10 years of his tenure, he did a good job. I have to mention here, we did this good job thanks to our American partners. We, at that time, we were the second recipient of American aid, which comes partly from your tax paycheck. We received about $2.1 billion a year. That has helped us rebuild our infrastructure, our economy, our financial institutions. The Americans, of course, in return, and very smart, they said, okay, but you really have to open your political system because we cannot keep on giving you this amount of money without you opening also your political system. It's not only about economic, it's also about political system. I was personally involved in this issue. I joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 1984. Don't start multiplying so that you know both people. I'm still young, young at heart. 1984 I joined, and I was fascinated, not just because I was a graduate of the American University, by this relationship, by our bilateral relationship with the Americans, but I was fascinated because I read lots of books. I was fascinated by the American history, and I saw that if we could take the same path, even though we are an older civilization, we could, through the experience that the U.S. went through, achieve a lot. So, again, to make a long story short, I started being a specialist on the Egyptian-American relations. I started reading all the files in the ministry, and I started engaging in the USAID package. I worked at the office of Dr. Ilbaz, who used to be the political advisor of President Mubarak. I was lucky. I mean, it's not a chance that every young Egyptian diplomat would have, but I have had the chance. And I saw the development of this relationship through figures, through numbers. And I knew very well from day one, and I wrote some papers, that the Americans, as much as they wanted to help Egypt economically, they had also the same vision that Egypt has to move correctly into political freedom. And the situation cannot stay as is forever. And I've attended many meetings between us as Egyptians and our American counterparts. Many of them are old friends of mine. I was just talking about one of them with Peter yesterday. We have engaged in lengthy conversation in how do we enrich the civil society in Egypt, and how to enrich political freedom, and how to reopen for another time the press and the opposition. Of course, there were some resistance. I wouldn't say some, probably it's an understatement. There was resistance from our side, and some of it was truly true and right. Those guys used to interfere a lot in our internal affairs. But at the same time, for a good reason, I understand, but it's about the pace. And I always stress the word pace. We are an old civilization. We are 7,000 years old. And if you would like to know Egyptians, you would know them by their timing. When you tell an Egyptian, I will expect you at 8 o'clock, well, he comes around 8:30 or 9 o'clock. He comes on time. Because time for us is much slower than time for any other nation. We live in buildings. I live in a building that is older than the United States. I mean, where I live, the building is 300 years old. I mean, that should have been put in a museum here. But these are the normal buildings we live in Egypt. That shows you how old our civilization is. People misinterpreted that. They thought that it's a matter of being so much patient and tolerant. I had some American friends of mine, in private conversation, they would tell me, we are so much amazed by the pressure that you guys go through, and you do not react. Is that being patient? Is that being so much tolerant? No, it's neither. We're very free people. We are very, as a matter of fact, volatile people, but our pace is different. We take our time, but when we take our time, it's like volcano. We erupt. And here is exactly what happened. Again, it was a matter of pace between President Mubarak and his own people. President Mubarak, for the first 10 years, I can tell you, he did a good job, and he was adamant on economic and political change. But comes the 10 next years of his tenure, I believe he did well on the economic figures. But when you compare his accomplishment on the social and political side, they did not match. And he fell in the exact same mistake as many other leaders would do. It was a pyramid shape. A small elite with huge amount of money, and the rest of the pyramid are under poverty line. and it did not even reflect socially. You would see communities with golf courses, swimming pools, and surrounded by slums where people eat from the garbage. Comes 2000, the early 21st century, Mubarak still in power, and all of us, we were debating the fact that it's a standstill. Starting from 9/11, the pace of Egyptian had changed, but Mubarak stood still. There was a slight factor, a great factor in the combination here, which was 9/11. The Republicans in power, Mubarak was pushed around from the year 2000 to the year 2008. He had acquiesced in some areas politically. But again, I have to stress the fact that the pace was much slower than the Egyptians could take anymore. If you ask yourself this question, why in January 25th the Egyptian people took down the streets? Is it because what happened in Tunisia? I beg to disagree. Because it was in Egypt where the revolution started in the Middle East in the year 2003 and 2004, when the first movement that is called Kifaya, the movement's called Enough, had started to taking down the streets and had started for the first time asking Mubarak and his son Gamal to step down. And then came another movement. I'm not talking about all the different movements because we had about more than 100 different movements, but I'm talking about the two major ones. Comes the other movement, 6th of April. That was in 2007 when they took down the streets of Al-Mahalla, which is the hub of textile industry in Egypt, which is more or less like, let's say, Michigan here, where the labor unions are concentrated. And again, they took down the streets, and it was a great event because they blocked the roads from Cairo, from the northern part of Cairo to the southern part of Cairo. Those two things should have alarmed the government, should have been a red light. I myself, among many other intellectuals, I'm not calling myself intellectuals, but I'm with other friends who are really intellectuals, we said that Mubarak has to step down. There is no other choice. This is a population of 85 million, out of which 65% are under the age of 25. It's a young country. And we knew it for sure that those young kids will not take it anymore. And the pace that Mubarak depended on, knowing very well that the Egyptian pace is much slower than any other pace because we're not different, no, because we are an older civilization, we are very patient people. But he made the greatest mistake because the pace has, the gap was so huge between his timing and the kids' timing. Bouazizi set himself in the fire. Yes, that's true, Howard. But probably you don't know that in 2008, a young kid, a brilliant young Egyptian, had committed suicide, throwing himself from Qasr Nil Bridge into the Nile. Qasr Nil Bridge is one of our major bridges, and he committed suicide. And when he was gone for a long time, his parents were kind of worried. They searched his bedroom, and then they found this paper saying the following: I'm a young Egyptian. I've graduated A+ from the University of Commerce, Cairo University. I spent most of my life waiting for a good job. I went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I took the exam. It's a harsh exam, like the US State Department. And I succeeded in the written exam. And after the written exam, we have an oral exam. When I went to the oral exam, I'm poor. I didn't have a nice suit. I didn't have a nice tie. So one of the interviewers asked me, where are you from? I said, where I'm from. He looked at my credentials, and he looked at me and he said, you know what, we could have taken you on board but you don't look neat, you don't look nice. We're sorry, you failed. And that was his dream. He couldn't believe it. He waited for the interviewer and asked him truly, what is wrong with me? He told him, you smell. He said, because I'm poor. He said, then, you know what? We don't have a place for you. He couldn't take it. He wrote a message to his father and mother asking for forgiveness. He went and jumped a bridge. Later on, we knew that one of the other factors why he threw himself in the Nile and killed himself, because he was in love with his girlfriend. He wanted to get married, and he promised her a job at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs because he deserves it, because he's an A+ student. And they were waiting for him to get the job, to get married, and build a family. Nobody, from the international community apparently knew a story as such, but this story happened over and over in our country. Frustrated young people who deserve to take their chances in life haven't had a chance. So Bouazizi happened in Egypt many times, but why in January? Because I believe the pace had come to a point where the people said, we are going to erupt. Enough. There is no tomorrow. We gave them all the chances. We are going to take things into our hands. It came a time where everybody in Egypt said there is no tomorrow. What is the tomorrow? We don't have a vice president. We don't know except Mubarak. There are a whole generation were born, lived, and didn't find a job under Mubarak. 30-something years. And 20 before them with Nasser and Sadat. So I believe it came when they believed that there is no tomorrow and they took down the streets. Who took down the streets? Not the poor young people. They were very rich young Egyptians, by the way. It was not anymore a matter of who had money or who didn't have money. It's a matter of people who wanted to take their future into their hands, who said that is enough. Those young kids on Facebook and Twitter went together, took down the streets, and changed a pharaoh who reigned Egypt for 30 years. Now we are in a situation where our political life is opened, the door is completely wide open, and I would quote one of our great political writers, his name is Muhammad Hassan al-Hikam, who said that, I want you to see the situation in Egypt as is. All of the Egyptians, the 85 million, were cooped imprisoned into a very dark, narrow room for 30-something years, and all of a sudden the door is open and the light is there. He predicted at that point, that was back in February, people are going to normally stumble because we're not used to the light, we're not used to the space. Unfortunately, we had challenges, we passed through tumultuous times since the revolution started. And as I always say, any revolution is an evolution. We don't expect results today. We had setbacks. We had many political parties that frightened some others are frightened by the others. Everybody's suspecting the other. From my point of view, I see it's healthy. It's a colorful political environment where we have from the extreme right to the extreme left. And it is up to the Egyptian people to decide their own fate, like what happened exactly in Tunisia. Be it anything, because you would hear a school of thought of us as Egyptians say, you know what, we don't want it Islamic. Others would say, you know what, we don't want it leftist. A third group would say, no, we don't want it liberals. We're running through elections this month, parliamentary elections, 47 political parties, ranging from the extreme right, from the extreme orthodox, religious orthodox, to the extreme left. So it's a huge bouquet of political ideas, diversified political ideas, and again, it's not frightening me personally. I see it's a very healthy sign because it's now everybody would have the choice to say, I want you, I want you, I want you to be my candidate. That's how I see myself, and that is how I see my country. What other challenges are we facing? Security. Why? Because there was a huge mistrust between the security apparatus and the people. The security apparatus admittedly killed more than 880 young Egyptians who went into a peaceful demonstration asking to take their future and their fate into their own hands. They didn't do anything wrong. They were killed. Another 1,000 and something young Egyptians are being either handicapped, lost their eyes, lost a limb, and many of them still hospitalized. So we don't have, as a result, we are rebuilding our police forces. So we have a security issue. We have a huge financial issue. Everybody knows that, or probably you don't, tourism is a great part of our revenues. Suez Canal is a second, and those two sectors have been greatly affected. So 1/3 of our foreign reserve has been eroded. Again, going back to this great country, we've been promised help by the US administration, $1 billion in loan forgiveness and the other loan guarantees. And I think Peter Howe is working on that.
Close.
Good to hear. Among many other challenges that I don't want to burden you with them, but I want to come to the final point, which probably what will interest you most is international relations. What is the new Egypt heading as a country, as the heart of the Middle East when it comes to foreign policy? I'm here, I guarantee you, the foreign policy of Egypt is institutionalized. Our foreign ministry has never been politicized. This is an institution that will stay and that will guide the foreign policy. And I don't know if you heard or not, we have said many times that Camp David Accord, that the peace between Egypt and Israel is a commitment, is unwavering commitment to Egypt. And we have seen great results since Mubarak had gone out of power. We have the exchange. We had a great deal between Hamas and the PLO. They signed a reconciliation treaty in Cairo, after failing for about 3 years. We have a great exchange between Hamas and Israel. I believe it's the first, it's a cornerstone probably of a new relationship. And even for Egyptians, we had an exchange of prisoners between Egypt and Israel. So our foreign policy is not going to be affected whatsoever. Another huge pillar, the U.S.-Egyptian-American relation. The Egyptian-American relation. So our foreign policy, on the contrary, I see it will go to a higher perspective in the sense that it's going to be people-to-people diplomacy. I'm a believer of public diplomacy. It's relatively a new political school of thought, but it started, in Fletcher in 1945 or 46, right after the Second World War. But I believe that the U.S. State Department and our Ministry of Foreign Affairs have a huge department of public diplomacy. We believe as politicians, if we don't go through the people, our diplomacy will fail. It's a challenge because if you talk about peace, it has to be real peace. Yes, we could argue for the past 30 years, Camp David was a cold peace, was a government-to-government peace. Israelis have to face a new challenge because people will not accept but an independent Palestinian state where the Palestinian people have the right to have their own homeland with their own flag on their own, as free, as peaceful as it could be. And on the other hand, Israel deserves to be recognized and has to live in peace. It's a challenge. And it's not up to us as a government anymore to engage in negotiations in closed rooms away from the public and sign treaties. Not anymore. That time had long passed. It's the time now where the people, where people will dictate what they want. And what the people want, I just stated it now, they want justice for the Palestinian people. They want to see them living in dignity. So it's going to be a new challenge in our foreign policy, but the parameters will stay the same. I will end up by reiterating what Dr. Howard has said. If you really want to do good in being great international relation activists, you really have to visit the regions of your interest. You cannot just be here in air-conditioned room 7,000 miles away from wherever you're interested and say, no, we are specialists in that. I don't believe in it. I believe if you really want to be a specialist in whatever region you are interested in, you have to take the trip, you have to go there. For example, in Egypt, we have the American University, which I'm proud. I'm one of its graduates. We have a great body of American and international students. We had a great Institute of Arabic Language. So again, if you're interested in the Middle East, you have to take the trip. And it's going to be accredited because it's part of the American educational system, our university in Cairo. So I'm not only talking about Egypt. If you're interested in South Asia, if you're interested in Latin America, you really have to go out of your closed doors. I could claim I became a specialist, in this relationship because I've been for such a long time here, working in different institutes, in different levels, formal, non-formal, until I probably got a grip of what it means, this relationship, and how the institution here works, looks like. So anyway, I think I spoke longer than I should have been. It was just a heart-to-heart conversation, and I wish you all luck in your life. Thank you very much.